Okay, thank you. After all this beautiful concrete, get ready to see a lot of plasterboard, actually. So thank you to Amelia and Rodrigo for the invitation and to the School of Porto, obviously. I'm very honored and happy to be here, and actually very impressed by the other architect that I admire a lot. Thanks also to my students who worked a lot this week for their patience and the implication in the workshop. So I am Nicolas Dorval-Bory. I run a small office in Paris. I graduated in 2007 and I settled my own office right after. I used to say that I started my office in the double crisis context. In 2008, the economic crisis of 2008 and the climate change crisis that both had a very strong impact on how architecture should react to this situation. But I'd also like to tell you about the very particular French context of those years, maybe why there is much tension on France today, where does it come from, in my opinion, and how it relates to my work. So, for me, there is indeed a small French genealogy of recent architecture that doesn't seem to be much discussed, actually, and I believe that this history is rooted in the enlightenments of the 18th century, the quest for truth and for reality, somehow what we can call positivism. This quest that basically led to modernism imprinted a very strong idea that any work of art or architecture should interact or locate itself in a definition of reality. So this, very literally, this thinking led to classic realism in the 19th century, like realism in painting, but also to the new realism in the 60s, a movement led by art critic Pierre Restany and artist Yves Klein, which will push the idea of as found object pretty far. I think that's the beginning of this idea of found object in France. But Yves Klein, it's also this very strong relation to invisible architecture, to natural and atmospheric elements that is already there for him in the 60s. And in the beginning of the 70s appeared this young architect from Bordeaux who is going to become a huge figure in France, Jacques Ondelat. So Jacques Ondelat, he is rather known for having been the teacher and first employer of Lacaton-Vassal and a friend and large influence to Jean Nouvel, among other famous architects. But he also built a very few very radical houses, among which the Maison Arteguibiel, this one, is actually the most striking in that it was simply a 30-meter long, very simple glazed volume made of a sequence of qualities as he puts it. The dark room, the bright room, the dank room, the dry room, etc. So we sense here in this project a very precise and scientific relation to atmosphere that focuses more on the creation of a set of conditions of physical situation than on form or function. And 20 years later, in 1993, after working with Jacques Ondelat for a few years, Lacaton-Vassal will build this house, the Villa La Tapie, in Bordeaux, which is a masterpiece of radicality, managing 2 volumes of opposed qualities through a very literal, efficient composition of banal elements. In 1999, Lacaton-Vassal again win the competition for a renovation of an art center, the Palais de Tokyo, At the time, it was directed by the same Pierre Restany, the founder of the Nouveau Réalisme. After his death in 2003, so just after the museum opened, the Palais de Tokyo will be led by Nicolas Dorval-Bory, which is maybe the most important art critic in France today, who wrote the Relational Aesthetics, which is a very important book on art that somehow summarizes pretty well the work of Lacaton-Vassal that derives also from Jacques Ondelat. At the same moment, Philippe Ram, a Swiss architect who settled in Paris, started to develop very thorough projects about invisible architecture as well, pretty much linked to Yves Klein as well, that were somehow the counterpart of the pragmatic thinking of Lacaton-Vassal. And in 2004, so a bit later, Éric Lapierre, who is now pretty famous, I think, was the first, I think, to try to qualify this specific attitude of various architects in France toward reality, between ideas like atmosphere, banality, neutrality, economy of means. So the result of this attempt, this book, was actually pretty bad, as this genealogy at that time was very blurry. It wasn't very clear, but I think my generation, the younger generation, understood all of this pretty well, and I believe this very context and this small history is responsible for the current architectural scene that we now have in France, among which a few already came to Porto Academy the previous year. So this introduction, just to say that most of what we do is attached to this situation, trying to engage with the physical reality, trying to understand how can one interact with it as little as necessary or as radically as possible, which is not exactly the same. So in some sense, do we want to step in and alter reality, or do we want to step back to allow things to happen in it? And if we want to step back as a kind of neutral posture, would you do it with less means, maybe like Lacaton-Vassal, or with less expression, like Philippe Ram, let's say? So this, all of this is really a starting point. So the following that I'm going to show you is about how you move from here, what is possible to do in this direction on the opposite one. So my first personal way to engage with reality was to settle as an architect right after my degree, with no experience actually, even if that meant working on very small things. This is almost the first apartment I did at the time. So even in those rather humble, small projects, I felt like working on real yet subtle elements, almost invisible elements, so physical elements such as light, temperature, acoustics. How do you engage with them? Maybe like Philippe Ram, who had been a great influence on me during my studies. He wasn't a teacher of mine, but I kind of liked very much his work. And with whom I will start to teach from 2011. At the same time, I had the intuition that this approach, this question of reality, should at some point lead us to some stranger situations, unpredicted situations, undetermined forms of space. So the mundane and the subtle physical parameters of our reality could produce unexpected, maybe paradoxical places. So those situations can maybe be found in images like this one that I like very much, of a sunset on Mars, where the inversion of colors compared to Earth, here the sky is red and the sunset is blue, creates a sense of distorted familiarity. It looks common and strange at the same time, and this happens at a molecular level in the very physical composition of Mars' atmosphere. In this image from last year in Marienbad, movie by Alain René, there is the similar quality, the diffuse light of the whole scene, so there is no shadow whatsoever, is inconsistent with the hard shadows of the characters. How could that even be possible? So in my work, I always go back and forth between this pragmatism and this kind of strangeness. So I organized my work that I'm going to show you along 5 simple ideas that are more like beliefs or intuition and not at all dogmatic views. So, so for me, and that's something that I analyzed after my work, it's not prior, but so for me, each project is an atmosphere, a renovation, a strategy, a composition, and a contradiction. So each project is an atmosphere. I'm going to start with a very founding project for the office. It was a 4 days installation in an art festival in Toulouse, in the south of France, during a very hot summer. And this project was a very simple attempt to create something that was only an atmosphere, an artificial cloud. So exactly like Dyvik and Skovsved's Blur building in 2002 in Switzerland. That was kind of a naive experiment, but it was a founding project for the office, and also the first experiment with very few basic elements. Here, just an artificial cloud and a greenhouse, and that's all. So I kept on working on those elements here, for example, with natural light, a competition in Japan based on the idea of the In Praise of Shadows. Maybe you know the book, obviously. So this work that was a bit phenomenological. At the beginning, we started to develop it in a much more precise way and to get into the detail of this scientific reality. This is different types of spectrum for artificial lamps. Here it's kind of the study that we do on thermics. And we sometimes combine those elements. Here it's a competition we won with Philippe Ram, the only project we did together that we are currently developing for the National Radio Building, which is this big circular building. We won the center, the competition for the center refurbishment, let's say, which is a project in which we are trying to transpose thermal qualities to acoustics qualities. Here it's a competition we did with Emilio Marin, friend of mine, in Peru, and it was a park based only on sound. And here it's our office where we try to engage also with those elements in a very simple and physical way. It was one of the first renovations we did also, so it leads us to the second thing. Every project is a renovation. So we initially started with a lot of renovation and a lot of interior design, and after a few years in that, we felt that we were kind of stuck somehow in with these limited commissions. But once we worked on a few competitions for new buildings, we realized that actually we had developed an attitude through renovation that was actually very relevant to understand any project. So first, when you think of any project as a renovation, you need to make a diagnosis of the existing condition. It might be a diagnosis, a structural diagnosis, but it can also be atmospheric diagnosis, like Aton Vassal puts it in for the Palais de Tokyo, when they're talking about the Palais de Tokyo project. But it can also be a social diagnosis, even a conceptual one. So the idea in that is that what is already there is valuable. So if you value what's already there, you rely on it, it probably means that you can do savings on your intervention. the quality that's already there doesn't have to be created. So you may need to create a set of conditions that help this quality to stand out, or you can focus on creating something else. So here it's an incredibly cheap project. I think that's maybe the cheapest per square meter that we did, where we were asked to create 4 different rooms where there were initially 3 identical ones. So relying on the qualities, features of the apartment, keeping natural light where it was initially, and ornaments where there were, we actually built very few elements in a very economic way to achieve quality. So just how do you design a corridor in the most simple way so it's still cheap? And this looks kind of fancy, I guess, but I assure you that it was the most simple detail that you could think of. It's just a saw cut in a wall and a piece of rectangular glass put inside. So when you show a detail like that to a contractor, he will say, okay, this is going to cost a lot, but when you tell him you just take a saw, you cut it and you put the glass and that's it. It's kind of a different perspective. So this project is, yeah. So here, for example, the floor, we just kept the floor like it was with the previous partition walls. It's all very simple, actually. And the bathroom, that looks kind of fancy also. We did it with the cheapest material, cheapest tile that we could get. It's the cheapest everything. It really is. I took the website of the provider and I took the cheapest things. And even the green color, we actually chose the same color as the plasterboard, the water repellent plaster blocks behind. So this way we could use just one layer of paint. So in this case, it's a very old and beautiful house in the center of France. It was a theater. It is a theater residency with a wide park along the Charente River. A house. The house already had a lot of qualities. I didn't put the plan, but the plan is pretty striking because beautiful rooms. So what we did is that the house was full of objects, and that was the only thing that was a problem to use the house. So we took all the objects, we got all the objects out of the house, we made an archive out of it, like a book, photography, and that's it. And just removing the objects from the house allowed the resident to really use any room of the house to do activities. The second thing we did in this project was to actually build a footbridge, because there was an island, isolated island in the park, and the actors would have liked to use the entirety of the park to put on plays, theater plays. So we built this very simple footbridge to give access to this island, and that's the only 2 things that we did in there. So thinking as renovation forces you to take a clear position toward the chronological hierarchy of a project. When designing a new building, you might design the foundation, the infrastructure, the plasterboard walls, the wiring, some furniture, all at the same time, and maybe without thinking too much that you are creating objects which lifespan on a technical but also on a conceptual level range from 6 months to 200 years. So in renovation, this question is almost the first one. You can choose to be conventional or pragmatic regarding this, like in these 2 projects where our interventions were as punctual, as light and clear as possible, and reversible also. So it's mostly a door and a few doors, wall and a few doors. And this cut, it's not the same apartment, it's an older one than the one I showed you. Or you can choose to design a strong concrete beam in a fragile 100 years old stone building which is about to collapse. and then it's hard to tell which part has been there before the other, and we find this ambiguity very exciting. On these two projects, I am frequently asked what was the original function of this building, or at least its lower part in this case. Because people think it's indeed a renovation, but these are completely new buildings. Well, actually, these are competitions, and I find flattering that people think that because of the potential people see in it, when they think it's a renovation, they think it was something else. It could become something else now, and it reminds me of the comments of US artist Robert Smithen on Passaic, stating that those suburban buildings in Passaic would rise into ruins even before they were erected, what he called the ruins in reverse. And I like very much this idea. Some commissions force you to take the relation to the existing building very frontally, like in this independent art fair in Paris, in a historic mansion. So, as an alternative to the conventional white cube, we had to create a few new walls and a good lighting condition in the different rooms, without thinking too much about the existing character of the building. So all of this had to be done in just a few days, because they could rent it for a few days. So basically these constraints lead you to adopt each time a very specific attitude toward decision taking, for example. And that leads us to the third part, that each project is a strategy. So this is the third edition of the same art fair that we did previously in this beautiful building. Here the question of strategy was even more clear in the third edition, because it was a 4,000 square meter parking lot, a spiral garage in bare concrete. And because we needed to be able to develop around 2,000 square meters of wall surface for the exhibitors to put the work of art in just 3 days, with a very steep ramp like that, we focused on finding a very efficient team of plasterboard installers, and we designed a plan where no single board would be recut. So no cut, no paint, no joint, so all plasterboard. And even if the plasterboard are kind of fragile, this installation could allow you to reuse all the boards afterward. And it was the same strategy with the signage, because we had to do the signage also. We found on site a lot of glass panels like that were from a previous project. So we decided to keep them, clean them, and just stick on top the signage of the fair. Another commission that we had last summer that led us to think strategically was for a new DJ booth in a nightclub. It's kind of a strange commission, and I have a lot of strange commissions like that. I shouldn't accept them, I know. So it's a friend who proposed me this project, and he might have expected from me something rather related to sound or light, because he knows I do this. But I thought it would be too complicated to develop something good, because the light, okay, I can show you quickly, the light was already designed like a few years before by some, I don't know, some lighting designer. And the sound, well, I don't want to mess with the sound for the DJ who is just behind. So I thought So basically, I had to make a piece of furniture, just a boundary between the DJ and the public. So we had 2 weeks to do this in August. So in August, everything's closed, so it's a mess. So I looked for not only the simplest construction that I could think of, but also the simplest intellectual way to assemble components together to be able to create a basic yet powerful unit. So we looked to the biggest I-beam we could find in 1 week and just stacked on it 3 other to reach the requested height. So the strategy here was also to find something that looked so obvious that it would be also easy to convince everyone, because it was my friend, but it was also a lot of people involved in the thing. So when you have to convince a lot of people, maybe you need to go to the most straightforward idea. So we just stack 4 beams, and then it's done. And the result is pretty striking. But actually, people don't see it so much when it's really crowded, but it's okay. So this question of working on a very defining limit, like it was there, because it was just a limit between the DJ and the crowd, to focus on the project on a reduced element is a strategy that we frequently use, actually. For example, here in this 130 square meter apartment in Paris, where we develop a general attitude that fits in a narrow 30 centimeter wide boundary throughout the project. So I didn't put a plan, but actually it's a complicated plan of an Haussmannian building. And only on this limit, which is the thickness of this wall here, we just developed a whole project that it's a limit that separates the apartment in 2 different sets of rooms that allows us to precisely mediate the relationship between those rooms and to concentrate the effort here and to be rather simple elsewhere. And focusing on a very reduced area of a project to achieve 90% of the brief request is something that we frequently do, actually. So here, for this store, in 2014, the client wanted a store that would do good on Instagram. Literally. So he wanted striking features, you know. So this is the kind of a weird brief for an architect, I guess. So, and it actually happens quite frequently, this kind of things. But this kind of misunderstanding also, people thinking that you are going to provide them with something, but you don't really know how to do it. They didn't understood what you do. And sometimes, yeah, I think we should refuse. But the clients were really nice, and it seemed fun, actually. So we thought maybe we do some fun. So we just accepted. And so we built this terrazzo staircase, like all terrazzo full like that. We just opened this window that was plain wall, so we have a lot of light. And we made this fancy design with a custom-made terrazzo from Italia with curved walls, small, nice details. Kind of a pleasure to work on this. And so the rest of the store could be a bit more basic, you know. And this was not so cheap, actually. So upstairs, because it was 2 floors, we did a very simple plan, divided by a white cross beam, like that, standing between the facade, so it's attached to all facade, it's freestanding like that, and it divides the space, and it holds the clothes rack, so there are no clothes rack standing on the floor. So just a way of dividing space that is important, that leads us to each project is a composition. So all this question of composition is something that is very important for us, somehow a bit classical, I must say. Because once you have the main ideas of the project, once you have your atmosphere, once you have your strategy, you need to draw the clearest lines as possible for your project to be strong. So it is important for us that the composition systems that we use in the project have a clear identity. A few projects, most of them unrealized, I think. So this is the other part of the competition in Peru. And this is a competition in Slovenia a few years ago. So sometimes we like also when two clear systems overlap. So like this modernist grid that is very plain and simple, and the circular space that made mostly for circulation. So what interests us in this is when there's those two kind of system interact, how the junction work somehow. This is the inside of this composition. This one is in Uganda. And these are some images of the project I developed with my students in Versailles, where actually the students have to work on a clear composition, but only based on one atmospheric phenomena or one theme actually. So it might be artificial light, temperature, ventilation, a bit what we are doing right now with the students of Porto Academy. In this project, the client initially told us that they bought this apartment, but they wouldn't live in it because it was an apartment that they would use only to host artists, they are gallerists, and to host small private exhibitions. So 2 bedrooms, the brief was 2 bedrooms, very minimum, a large living room to have those exhibitions, and as much freedom as we could propose. So the initial plan of the apartment, it was divided with the partition walls like that, a bit basic. So it was very conventional. So we proposed a very simple plan that could maximize the requested uses of the brief. But what we planned, this very composition actually ended up being a really bad strategy. Because as actually the client I'm revealing a thing now. The client were too shy to admit they were a couple and that they will live in this apartment. So after weeks of embarrassment, because they finally said, okay, actually the layout was perfectly fine before and we were too shy to just talk about you with it. So we proposed, they proposed us to pay for a new design, which was pretty fair actually, and to keep the previous organization of the space. So choosing a certain composition can be a bad strategy, which leads us to the last thing. Each project is a contradiction. So how do you deal with contradiction? Contradiction can give a certain richness in the project, but we can also enhance this as a design element. In this case of this apartment, we chose to reverse the stakes of the project, making the most classical but still pleasing design that we could. So we didn't talk about the plan anymore. The plan was set and we just focused on other things. So just a few images. So the only thing that we thought was interesting in the previous plan is that we managed to free this column that was taken into a lot of walls. So we thought, okay, that's the only revenge we are going to take. We are going to keep this column free. So we made this little curve that is that makes the column stand out. That's the only memory somehow of the previous project. Yeah. So It was never something that we really planned in our project, actually, but we realized that in most of them, we would rely on those contradictions, contrasts of approaches, dialectics, if you want, Hegelian dialectic of opposing two things to solve the project. Opposed situations or opposed systems of thinking that behave in totally different ways. In this, this is pretty clear in this competition we did in Munich, where the first dialectic for us was to imagine housing that contradicted somehow the surrounding neo-modernist buildings that were kind of closed with no visible materiality, neither porosity to the outside. So we were aiming for something a bit more domestic, more vernacular somehow. A wood construction with a low carbon footprint. That's what we thought would be nice for this neighborhood. But we needed to host noisy activities in the ground floor carpentry workshop and restaurant. So because we would have to, we would have the housing above, we made this very strong and a very thick ground level in concrete. And these, with this angled shape that that breaks the stationary sound waves, and a thick slab to insulate the housing above. So that would provide a straightforward contradiction between the two systems, because above we would have a very different system. So we were aiming for a wooden construction above, but what is a wooden construction actually? Is it even a word, wood construction? Could we be more specific on that? So I grew up in the countryside where all the barns were made in oak, post and beam structure, but I also designed a few houses and project with a very thin pine wood structure that we call platform frame or balloon frame. So we could design something that was whole CLT panels or whole post and beam panels, but we thought it was rather interesting to use both of those extreme qualities, like the high craftsmanship of this. It's a bit expensive. You have to be clear on where the loads are getting in the project. But here it's a very simple construction. It doesn't take too much load, so you cannot put a building on top, but you certainly can use it to arrange a plan that is not so clear, you know. So it was basically this structure of having the very strong ground floor in concrete, 3 layers of post and beam in oak, and then the platform frame structure. And conveniently, the 3 of them had a different layout in plan. Scale model section. So this is the ground floor, and you will see that the structure actually dissolves somehow when you go up. So there you have also the 2 buildings in post and beam structure, and then 1 bar of platform frame structure, which is much more dense, and it's good that it's on the top floor because it couldn't support much weight. Obviously it could. I mean, you can make thicker things, but we like the clarity of using this system very literally. This is the workshop, and this is the entrance of the housing, and some winter gardens, and the interior. So now I'm going to show you 5 projects kind of quickly that they all have those 5 features that I talked about in very different ways. So this is a very small apartment that we did in Paris a few years ago. It was a 90 square meters, 19 square meters apartment, 20, let's say. the client who inherited this apartment from his uncle told us this is a really bad apartment, it's really dark, it's ground floor, so you need to do something about light in there, and I will rent it out, I won't live in there, so you can do whatever you want. So if you want to work on light, on artificial light obviously, because we cannot create new windows, it's the same question as with the structure before. What is exactly artificial light? Do we design a good project and then we put a large amount of light in it? Or we first design the light and then after we do the design? So that's more interesting, this one for us. And when you say, okay, I'm going to do the lighting first, but if you do the lighting, what does it mean also? What is artificial lighting? So you get into the detail of the things and you realize that actually it seems pretty obvious that the more the quality is high in artificial light, the more it consumes also. It's not so true today because there are some new technologies, but it was kind of this. And also you realize that the more efficient, the more light you produce as a quantity and not as a quality. So if you reduce the quality of the artificial light, which is the case with this type, low pressure sodium lamps, they just emit all the energy that is consumed in one narrow wavelength. So it's basically a monochromatic light, which is actually the most efficient type of lamp. It doesn't consume any energy, it's very efficient. That's why you find them in highways and tunnels. So we thought, maybe having two good lamps is a good thing, but one good lamp would be the lamp with a good light, the good quality, and one other good lamp would be the one that doesn't consume much energy. Two ways of thinking, you know. So these are the two lamps, low pressure sodium and high quality fluorescent tubes. These ones, they don't consume so much energy actually, but much more than this one. So to start the composition, we said, okay, we need to do a first step. And the first step, is to draw a simple wall. That's the first thing that you would do in a space, right? So we drew this wall, we moved it a bit back and forth to see where it was well, and we put the two lights on both sides of it. And we studied how the light would behave, and we thought, okay, this amount of, well, kitchen could be also here, but you can put it also in somewhere else. It was just to give an idea of what was possible. And this is the low pressure sodium lamp. And this basically is the project, you know. It all comes from this very, very simple diagram of having two qualities of light, and you can actually the design after that, you don't design so much, you just make rules, you follow the rules, and it gives a certain result, which was actually, it's not a joke, but it was, we were actually surprised by how, what it produced actually. This one is a bit overexposed because it's actually a bit dark in there, and this is more realistic. And what we like very much is the gradient that we have between those two conditions. Obviously, it wouldn't be very nice to live in a space only lit by low pressure sodium lamps, because in reality, when I did the test myself, when you stay 10 minutes in this light, your brain adapts and you start to see really in black and white. So kind of strange. But it's pretty fun actually, and when you mix it with a very good quality of light, you have this beautiful gradient that is much more than just color. It's actually the density of light that evolves. And in this project, there is a deep question that is still unresolved, and that is really related to to my introduction. Is we thought of the most simple design that we could, and we argue a bit about how we should design those stairs. If you want to do the most simple or most neutral design that you can think of, should the stairs be almost invisible like that, white, this, or you just go and buy an aluminum ladder? It's the two attitudes and it's all the time a question that we try to resolve. What is the right attitude toward this? This is another project that we did in the south of France. It's a competition we won for a public library. Actually, it was in a kind of a small town. It's not even suburbia. It's not really a village. But it was an existing library that that was very had a good frequentation. A lot of people would came mostly because of this parking lot here, and the city, because it was functioning so well, the city wanted to make an extension of it. So they had thought of doing an extension here. At the same time, the building was in really bad condition, especially the roof. So we knew that we had to redo the roof. So we thought immediately, okay, we are not going to make an extension here because without parking lot, people are not going to come to the library, which is actually its best thing, that people just come there. And the extension, we are going to put it on the roof because we already need to do the roof again. So that was the existing condition, and we decided, just saying this first thing as a strategy, you say something very important. You say that you are going to keep the plan as it is, and actually it's pretty bad. I mean, I would never design this, and I assume no architect here would do it also. I mean, a triangle, circle, come on. But and it was actually the byproduct, this project of the swimming pool, that was kind of the pride of the architect who did the complex of the two. So this was had much less attention, and it was in bad condition also. But saying you keep the plan, and the plan is not a question anymore, you are going to focus on something else. And it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's courageous, but it was kind of a bold movement somehow. So we kept the plan, we kept the columns, bad columns, we kept some structures, and that was the existing design, you know, before. You don't like it? So we thought of mostly using this as a starting point and put some new volumes on top, and using the whole space, removing the partition walls to make a open interior landscape in 3 dimensions, then because we had a new floor. So the extension on the roof, it wasn't, the stakes weren't really structural. We had a very low budget to do the project. I think everybody talked about low budget this week, but this is true here. So look, for instance, how we just put the metal structure on top of the bad concrete column. I mean, I'm not so proud of it, but it's just not the question in this project. The question was to create spaces that would allow people to do things. For example, they wanted to have people reading outside, so we thought, okay, this enclosed terrace on the top between the 2 volumes, it allows people to read in the sunlight or in the rain, maybe, not so much, and have the books that are secured at the same time. So once we did that, we thought of the space, the interior space, as a possibility of having different qualities of light, of temperature, of light. I said light? No, sound? Yeah, well. So the 3 parameters here, obviously in the terrace it's the most extreme. And because everything is open, we have heating floor, so we change the density of the heating floor from one zone to another. And having these very determined qualities, it's not a matter when everything is open, because you're not saying you are going to stay in this room that is dark. No, you say just there is a zone that is dark, so you can move a bit if you want to have more light. And that's how landscape work, actually. You move a bit around to find your comfort. So this was a very high and very bright area. We provided a lot of artificial light because we found out that there were regulation for how many light you could put, how little light you could put. You should have 300 lux, everywhere. So we knew it, but there is no limit on how much you can implement in a project. So it just went full light there. And here it's a very absorbent material in the ceiling, and contrasted situations here between very reflective and very bright space, a very absorbent space, just touching a very reflective one also. This shape, it was the original circle in the project that we kept. We just put a staircase in it. And we like that there is always this relation everywhere, visual relation between different spaces of the project. And aesthetically, we just wanted to make no statements. Like it's not like in the previous apartment where it had to be really white for the light. Here it was more like no design somehow. So it's just very simple roof cast here, and no design on the facade. You know, the facade was like that. It wasn't like that. We made some all of those equipments, but we didn't care so much about how it would look in the end. And also not touching the shape in plan and not doing any exterior works allowed us to leave the floor, the ground floor, exterior ground floor, as it was. You know, it's there is no intention also of design on this one. Here it's the same, kind of straightforward. I don't talk about the bird, but we could, because it's our idea, not directly, but it's a friend. We invited a friend to do a very opposed design to what we would do, and he did those birds. We were surprised, but well, we felt it was okay. So these are two houses. Maybe I'm going to be quick on this one because it's kind of long. Actually, it's an entrepreneur who contacted me in Paris because he was from the Comoros. He wanted to build a house there. It's in a small island in the Indian Ocean. Amazing sites in the jungle like that. So we were talking about the project, and he said to me, okay, we should go there. And because he had no topographic survey, he had no document at all, almost no pictures, and well. So we went to visit the site, and at first sight, you say, okay, it's going to be tough to build here. I think it's kind of complicated. There is no road. You had to go by walk on a small path. The terrain is kind of complicated. The materiality of it is really soft. So I said to him, I think it's going to be tough. So he told me, yes, I know. Maybe I should buy a small terrain that is flat, that is close to the road, that has electricity and water. So we can use this as a base camp somehow to build this one. Okay, he was this kind of guy. And so during one week when we were there, he started to look for another terrain and actually bought a second terrain. I had fun. Actually, this view is really close to the water. It was a bit far away, but it was like that. And his idea was to use this terrain to build the first house that would be a draft, to test the techniques that we would, because it's really remote, so there is no access to concrete or to metal beams. So you need to rely on local technique. They are doing mostly concrete blocks, homemade concrete blocks there. So we wanted to experiment a bit like that as a first thing. But my idea was I never thought it was like doing a draft and then do it the good house. I thought immediately that the brief was you are going to design two houses that share the same technique and that could be independent from one each other, like a small family, you know. This was the question of orientation. It's on the equator, so no north and south orientation. You don't care about this. The sun is always up, so you just need to protect you from the sun there. But if you want to look for coolness, you need to either go up in the air or down in the earth. That's where temperature is kind of nice, because at 1 meter above the floor and 1 meter below, it's like hell. and the floor is mostly basaltic, so it's dark, so it gets a lot of heat. The two sides were really opposed, so the background is the plan, let's say the aerial view. So you see that the aerial view doesn't say much about the site. It's just random trees everywhere. But the line is the section here. And the section is very expressive. It says a lot about the terrain. In the other side, the plan was really defining. It was just a square here, perfect square almost, with the city. So the plan gives you a lot of information, but the section is kind of mute. It doesn't say a lot. So from the beginning, you see that you are going to work with opposed qualities like that. The first house would be on a crest because we had not so many choices for many reasons, and the second house would be more compact. So we were also about to develop a house that is a bar and a house that is a square. And that's what we did. In a very literal way, we thought of using the two climatic strategies of using the cold of the ground and the cold of the air above to organize the project. So the project is like a binary situation each time, where you have those volumes that function more as thermal inertia volumes, and the others, the open ones, with cross-ventilation. These are the plans. What I like about the plans, both houses, is that it's very regular and very strict, but each square is a small universe in itself with its own rules of accessing, and because the height also changed a lot. These are some thermal studies we did, scale model, a few images of the first house. This is the actual view. I'm going to tell you why it stopped, but I was disappointed not to get there again. Bedroom, bathroom. Yeah, and here actually you have also these different ways of accessing the rooms that are not on the same level as well. We did some thermal studies to see where it would be better to put the floors to keep the room cool. So yeah, that was the ground floor that could be floodable, and you go upstairs, and that's the view. These mesh actually, they are pretty big because they are there to prevent you from mostly big bugs. You know, there are some huge bugs, and also bats, like 1 meter bats, pretty impressive. They are cool actually, they don't bite. But you don't want to have them in your house. And so finally the client was super excited with the design, and we planned 6 months later to go back there. And we I developed contacts with the local architect there. There are not so many because it's a small island. So it could have been really good, but the client, he was an entrepreneur and he got bankrupted. So he lost all his money, he got divorced, he changed his life, and I called him back. I was like, okay, I mean, what is going on? And he said, okay, we don't do anything more with the houses, let's leave it here. So I was kind of disappointed, you assume. Another project is a gallery, an art gallery we did in Bologna a few years ago. The client, they contacted us because they saw the art fair that we did before, and they wanted to hire us just for the light initially. These are the two exhibition rooms, and this is the office space in between. But when I went to the site, we realized together that they didn't know how to handle the project actually, because they were really embarrassed with this way of crossing the office space between the two exhibition rooms. So obviously, like most of you would have done, I guess, I said, okay, an office can be good, we open everything and we cross the office, right? So that was pretty strong for them, so they said, okay, very good. So we just aligned the wall, the doors there. We did the lighting study, and we started to design those spaces of gallery that you all know that are pretty neutral, kind of average. There is this light that is really standard. Ventilation has to be discrete. Handles have to be discrete. Everything has to be kind of neutral. But we said maybe we can use this neutrality that is pretty strong to have it as a counterpart in the office space. And whereas we were about to do a very classical and neutral treatment for ventilation and light in the exhibition space, we thought, okay, maybe we can do the opposite and have ventilation and light as objects in the office spaces. And even the circulation, we did all those concrete stairs in a very object style, let's say. So you can cross the two, go from one room to another, and you understand that you are not in the exhibition space. And those pipes are obviously very big because they are not really in relation to this space, which is small. They are in relation to the big spaces of exhibition that you have on both sides. So it creates kind of a strange kind of technical room in the middle. And this is an artist residency we just finished this year. The date is wrong. We finished a few months ago. It was the house of a famous French writer in the center of France that got abandoned at some point. The city of Poitiers decided to buy it and to put an artist residency for refugees, writers there. So we won the commission and we started this diagnosis like we always do and start seeing some very nice features in the park and very nice features also in the existing house. So this was ground floor. There was an old part of the house that was pretty good, well composed, you know, symmetrical with the load-bearing wall in the center, and this was an extension from the 40s. This was the house, the extension here. It was in a bad condition, but the ground floor was kind of okay. It was just this part connecting the two that was really, really bad. Upstairs, because of dankness, it had been a bit more, it was kind of bad, so we had to redo it all again. And because we found this space, that was the worst one, it was also a very small one. So we said, maybe we can focus on this space and do good works in there, and we do savings for the rest of the house that can be more simple. And we found out this image of Jean-Richard Bloch, the writer, in his house with his wife there, with this very strange light and this relation to the window, to the frame of the window that was kind of strong for us. And it made me thought of this Danish painter that I love, Wilhelm Amershoy, and how this strange light comes out of nowhere, and you see really the materiality of the light, and outside you don't really see a landscape, you see another facade. So there is this kind of strange relation. So we thought maybe this really bad space that is there currently, we can just turn it into something that is completely different, that could be a kind of new exterior space, but not a real exterior, because we didn't have the mean to make a hole in the facade or whatever. We wouldn't be authorized anyway. So we thought this really bad space could become some kind of artificial exterior. And we were interested in this notion of a space that is not literally exterior, but it has the features of something exterior. The same way that sometimes in the city you are outside and you feel like it could be an interior space, but you're outside. So kind of these reverse things. So we thought of this very bright void space, a double height, that would be some kind of the core of the project, and that would allow also to bring some light in the artist studio that are above. So this is the upstairs floor, and this is the void, and this window and this one were already existing. They were door actually, not windows. So we made them as windows, and we created this one to allow the light to go through the inside of the studio. We took advantage of this partition wall here, not partition, but structural wall, to gather all the activities, all the technical things along this wall in the center, allowing us to make very long functional bend like this. So you have the windows here. And because it's not really exterior, it's a fancy window, but it's really cheap actually, because it's only interior one. If you wanted to do the same window as this one as an exterior window, it would cost a lot of money, because it should be openable, it should be thermally insulated, and so on. So this is an image that we made for with a character. It's the brother of Wilhelm Amershoy, the painter. So it's a collage. We don't do that much, but it felt right at the moment. And this is a view of what we imagined in the place. At nighttime, you have this kind of exterior light that we had to design in a good way. We needed to make not just an average light. And these bathrooms that are not really bathrooms, that are more also like kind of terrace. We thought of them like it was an exterior space also. This is the interior space. You see the old ceilings, so we could take this whole new volume to make the space. We try to keep also all of the features, the old features of the house. This is when we started to break the floor between the two. It's very minimal, you know, it's maybe 12 square meters, this staircase. And that's my final project. But I think it was very efficient. So downstairs, we didn't do much. We just sanded the floor, painted the wall. The city of Poitiers allowed us to take some plants from the greenhouse of Poitiers. And we put they had a plan to buy a lot of IKEA furniture to welcome the Syrian writer that is now there. We were like, okay, maybe we can just find for a really much cheaper good furniture in second-hand shop. So that's what we did. 2 afternoons with the city of Poitiers, we went by those for little money. And this is this interior space, this void that is kind of exterior and that is just in paint here and rough cast here. That has a programmable light. It's LED, but it's tunable white, and it's programmed so it evolves along the day to match or not match. You can change it as you want. The color temperature of the sky outside. So sometimes it can be matching the exterior sky. Sometimes you can really do something else. And I like the view that you can have from one studio to another. And this one feels like it's kind of an exterior door, and you don't really know if it's exterior or interior. We called the project un second jour, which means a second day. And in French, second jour, it's the architectural device system where you have a window, you have natural light through a second window, through another room. It's called the second jour. So we thought it was a good idea to name it this way because it was also kind of the second life of the house, and it was the perfect punchline for the mayor. Yeah. So this is one of the studio. Some details of this large wall, and there were some openings in the roof. We just made it a bit better. This is the north bedroom studio with a colder natural light. So we thought it was nice to have some warmer tile in the bathroom to counterbalance. And this is obviously the staircase below. So we could have done just a slope here, but it was nicer to have some steps to put the towels or whatever. And there is this thing with all the same sections of elements. And this is an old sink that was in the house before. So in the bathrooms, that's kind of the same design, the rough cast and the tiles, and you feel almost like you're having a shower outside. All this custom made. That's kind of a strategy, this one, because finding a nice radiator is kind of complicated. You will discover, I'm sure. And in doing this, it looks kind of expensive. But when you go to see the plumber and you tell him, okay, you might either buy an expensive radiator or you can just buy 3 meters of tube and you bend it. He's like, okay, I'm going to buy the tubes and bend it. in reality, it's a bit more complex, but it worked pretty fine on the project. He was very happy to do this, and it was actually kind of cheap. And this is the south bedroom with the green, gray-green tiles, because it's south, so you have a warmer color temperature coming from outside, so it balances. And this was a random but nice chimney that was in there before, and we wouldn't feel like just taking the marble and throw it away, so the chimney was condemned anyway for insulation, so we thought, okay, we just leave it there, and that's as it is, you know? And that's it. Thank you.